For more than a century, scientists from many disciplines have studied a single linen cloth known as the Shroud of Turin. The cloth is not called the Shroud of Turin because it originated there, but because of where it eventually came to rest. Like many important historical artifacts, it is named after the city where it has been preserved for the longest continuous period of time, the city of Turin in northern Italy. The shroud has been kept there since the late 16th century and is housed today in Turin Cathedral. Before arriving in Turin, the cloth passed through several regions and was known by different names. In earlier centuries, it was often referred to simply as the linen, the burial cloth, or the holy shroud. In some historical records, it is associated with what was known as the image of Edessa, a mysterious cloth said to bear the image of a man's face, venerated in the ancient city of Edessa in what is now modern-day Turkey. Historical sources suggest that this cloth was later brought to Constantinople, the capital of the Byzantine Empire, where it was publicly displayed. Records from that period describe a burial cloth bearing the image of a crucified man, not just a face, matching what we see on the shroud today. After the sack of Constantinople in the early 13th century, the cloth disappears from the historical record for a time before re-emerging in France in the 14th century. From there, it eventually made its way to Italy, where it was entrusted to safekeeping in Turin. Throughout history, it was common for relics and important objects to be named after the places where they were kept, not where they originated. The name Shroud of Turin follows the same pattern. So the name tells us where the cloth is, not who it belonged to, and that distinction matters. Because the question of the shroud has never been about geography. It has always been about identity. The Shroud of Turin bears the faint front and back image of a crucified man. Physicists, chemists, medical doctors, textile experts, and forensic specialists have examined it using modern scientific tools. It has been photographed, scanned, chemically tested, and microscopically analyzed. Despite this intense scrutiny, there is still no scientific consensus on how the image was formed. What is agreed upon is this: the image does not behave like any known painting, stain, or natural imprint. The Gospels are clear that Jesus was buried according to Jewish custom, and they specifically mention linen burial cloths. In Gospel of Matthew, we are told that Joseph of Arimathea wrapped the body in a clean linen shroud. In Gospel of Luke, the wording is even more precise. Luke writes that Jesus was wrapped in a linen shroud and laid in a rock-cut tomb. The Greek word used is syndon, meaning a large linen burial sheet. This is significant because it describes exactly the kind of cloth the Shroud of Turin is. The most detailed account comes from Gospel of John. John tells us that Jesus' body was bound in linen cloths with spices, in keeping with Jewish burial customs. But what John emphasizes most is what happened after the resurrection. When Peter entered the empty tomb, John records that he saw the linen cloths lying there, and the face cloth, which had covered Jesus' head, placed separately. John then writes a simple but powerful line: he saw and he believed. John doesn't describe an empty tomb alone. He describes undisturbed burial cloths. That detail only matters if the cloths themselves mattered. One detail that's easy to overlook, but incredibly important, is the cloth itself, what it's actually made of. The Shroud of Turin is composed primarily of linen, a fabric made from flax fibers. This matters because linen was the standard burial material used in 1st century Judea, particularly in and around Jerusalem. Flax was widely cultivated, and linen was closely associated with Jewish burial customs and ritual purity. This fits precisely with the Gospel accounts, which tell us that Jesus was wrapped in a linen shroud and buried according to Jewish custom. What's just as important is what the shroud is not made of. Cotton was not used for burial cloths in 1st century Jerusalem. While cotton was known in parts of India and the Far East, it was not part of local textile and production in Judea at the time Jesus lived. Archaeological evidence from Jewish burials in this period consistently shows linen, not cotton. This becomes especially relevant when we look at the carbon dating controversy. In 1988, a small sample of the shroud was taken for radiocarbon dating, and the result suggested a medieval date. At the time, this was widely reported as having debunked the shroud's authenticity. But what wasn't widely explained is where that sample came from. The sample was cut from a corner of the cloth, an area that had been handled repeatedly over centuries, exposed to heat during a known fire, and repaired more than once. Later textiles analysis showed that this section contained interwoven cotton fibers, unlike the rest of the shroud, which is overwhelmingly linen. That detail matters. Cotton repairs were commonly added during the medieval period, especially when valuable textiles were restored rather than discarded. In other words, the area that was tested was not representative of the original cloth, but of a later patchwork repair. This doesn't automatically date the shroud to the 1st century, but it does mean that the 1988 carbon dating results cannot be treated as definitive. Even many scientists who remain skeptical of the shroud's authenticity now acknowledge that the sampling location was problematic. When you step back and look at the whole picture, the material itself tells a coherent story. The main body of the cloth is linen, consistent with 1st century Jewish burial practice. The presence of cotton appears only in repaired sections, consistent with later historical handling. And the confusion arises when those two are treated as if they were the same thing. The shroud, like any ancient artifact, bears the marks of history, not just from its origin, but from the centuries it survived. The image on the shroud depicts a man who suffered extreme physical trauma. There are dozens of wounds consistent with Roman scourging. Puncture wounds appear around the scalp. There are wounds in the wrists and feet, consistent with crucifixion. There is a large wound in the side of the chest, consistent with a Roman spear injury. Medical specialists note that the blood flow patterns are anatomically accurate. They follow gravity. They show clotting and serum separation consistent with real human blood. These are observable facts, not theological claims. When scientists examined the shroud under magnification, they found something no one expected. The image is not painted. No pigments, dyes, or binding agents have been detected. The image does not soak into the cloth. Instead, only the outermost fibers of the linen threads are discolored, a change thinner than a human hair. When photographed, the image behaves as a photographic negative. When image brightness is analyzed digitally, it correlates with distance, meaning the image encodes three-dimensional spatial information. This combination of features does not occur in paintings, scorch marks, or contact stains. These findings were documented most extensively by the Shroud of Turin research project known as STURP. Their conclusion was careful and precise. The image is not the work of an artist, and the mechanism that formed it is unknown. Over decades of testing, scientists have ruled out many explanations. Painting was ruled out due to the absence of pigment. Heat scorching was ruled out because scorch marks penetrate fibers and fluoresce under ultraviolet light. The shroud image does neither. Contact rubbing was ruled out because it would distort facial proportions. Body oils and sweat were ruled out because they soak into cloth and degrade chemically. Science does not yet know what caused the image, but it knows what did not. One of the most significant scientific findings involves the blood. Chemical analysis indicates the presence of real human blood. The bloodstains show correct clotting behavior and transfer patterns. Crucially, the blood was deposited before the image formed. Whatever caused the image left existing bloodstains undisturbed and affected only the surface fibers of the cloth. Any explanation must account for this. Several hypotheses remain under consideration. Some researchers propose a chemical oxidation or dehydration process involving linen fibers and gases. This could explain surface discoloration, but not the image's precision or three-dimensional encoding. Others suggest a Maillard reaction, similar to food browning. This explains some surface effects, but requires chemical conditions not confirmed in burial environments. Some physicists have explored whether a brief burst of radiation, such as ultraviolet light, could alter linen fibers at the surface level. In laboratory conditions, radiation can reproduce certain image characteristics, but the energy levels required exceed known biological processes, and no experiment has recreated the full image. A small number of researchers have proposed electrostatic or corona discharge effects, which could produce a non-contact image. This remains theoretically possible but unproven. Each hypothesis explains something. None explain everything. At minimum, the shroud remains a mystery, and Scripture tells us Jesus was buried in linen, and that the cloths were left behind. For me, the shroud does not replace the Bible, and it is not something to be worshipped. As Christians, our worship belongs to God alone, not to objects, images, or relics. The shroud has no power in itself, but I do find it deeply compelling, a striking reminder of Christ's suffering and sacrifice. And personally, I believe the image on the cloth was formed with extraordinary power at the moment of the resurrection. Now, I'd love to hear your view. What do you think the Shroud of Turin is, and why?